Effectiveness Committee, I call this meeting to order.
How are you?
Roll call, please. Dr. Bofi. Present. Mr. Castillo. Dr. Davis. Ms. Ellis. Present. Mr. Garvey. Ms. Holloway. Ms. Holloway is here. Mr. Mallory.
Here.
Mr. Morris. Ms. Orange-Jones.
Here.
Mr. Rock. Ms. Bochet.
Here.
And Ms. Tedesco. You have a quorum. Thank you. First item, please.
The consent agenda is ready for your approval, adding items 5.1 through 5.4, 6.6, and 6.7.
May I get a motion? Ms. Jones and Dr. Davis. Is there any opposition? Motion passes. Next item.
The first item is on page 1, item 2.1, consideration of an update report regarding staffing survey results. The department recommendation is to receive.
Ms. Bochet. Second by Orange-Jones.
Thank you. At this point, Ian Cooper, Deputy Assistant Superintendent, will make a presentation relative to the staff vacancy survey. This is a survey that we ask systems to complete. Please understand that staffing vacancies at the system level, that is not something that the department has previously collected, nor did we have an easy way in which to do this. So we had to put a survey out into the field, and thankfully, we did have a large percentage of systems apply with the request, try to provide the information because I believe they felt like it was in an effort to help them to eliminate staffing concerns and certainly in advance of the legislative session. So at this point, Ian is going to make a presentation and then we're happy to answer any questions you may have about the survey.
Good morning. So just to add to what Dr. Brumley said, across the country, including in Louisiana, we have been unable to answer the question about how many vacancies exist in our educator workforce. And so school systems have also had trouble answering this question. We really wanted to gather this data for the legislature, for us, and for you all, and the Recruitment, Recovery, and Retention Task Force, so that we can really understand the scale of the need to help drive some of the decisions around those other recommendations that the task force approved in the fall. And so we did release a survey to all of our school systems where each school system's HR director submitted that survey, which is the most accurate report of vacancies we have at each school in each school system. And so I'm going to share with you the results of the survey today. Our HR directors had about a month and a half to collect the data from their school system and then submit those responses through a survey to LDOE. Survey responses were received from about 74% of all school sites in the state. The survey components included for each school within each system the total in vacant positions that are certified, classified, full-time, part-time, the degree of difficulty in filling those vacancies, and then the strategies that school systems use to fill those vacancies. Dr. Bromley mentioned some of these, but just a few things to consider as we move through the data. What we did to show you all the responses was we isolated certain factors to share with you to see the impact according to different characteristics. There are numerous factors for why vacancies could be higher or lower based on a characteristic, but that data is not collected here. We're just showing you by characteristic the data that was submitted. The total number of sites or schools varies according to the characteristic that you'll see. Thus, you'll see differences with looking at the rates and averages across those. This is also one snapshot into educator vacancies and one data set. This data was collected through the best means at the time by our HR directors and to the best of their ability. This also, like Dr. Brumley said, is the first time we've collected this data, so we do not have a comparison to previous years. So without seeing this data over time, we can't make certain claims about the data yet. So there are some big picture takeaways from the survey. As reported by the survey, there are 1,854 certified and 1,129 classified vacancies in the state. This accounts for about 4% of total certified positions and 6% of total classified positions. Certified positions refer to those positions requiring certification, like a teacher or principal, and classified positions are referring to those that do not require a certification, so a secretary or a paraprofessional would be an example of those. We also used the 74% of schools that were included in the data collection and combined them with estimates for schools that did not submit. And we estimate that the total number of Louisiana public school teaching vacancies at present is about 2,520 positions. Our lower performing schools have higher vacancy rates, charter schools have higher vacancy rates than our traditional public schools, and our bus driver and teacher vacancies were indicated as the most difficult to fill. And on the next slides, I'll review takeaways and data from each section of the survey that our HR directors submitted. So the first section of the survey was asking HR directors to provide the total number of certified and classified positions at each site, along with the vacancies in those positions at each site. And then rates and averages were calculated for these vacancies. Certified vacancies at schools with a D or F letter grade and those labeled as comprehensive intervention required were higher, and this is also true for school systems that have a letter grade of D or F. Classified vacancy rates were higher than certified vacancy rates, and the average school system vacancies for classified and certified positions are highest in our largest school systems. This graph shows vacancy rates at the school level by different characteristics. So here you'll see school type, charter status, letter grade, and CIR status. In the school type section, combination schools include grade bands outside of typical ranges. So normally we would consider pre-K through 5, 6 to 8, and 9, 12 a typical grade band. So a combination school could be grades 7 through 12. They have more than those grades. For school type, certified vacancy rates for middle schools were 1 percentage point higher than elementary and high schools. Our combination schools have the highest vacancy rates and are 1 percentage point higher than middle schools, and our classified rates are higher across all school types. Certified vacancy rates for CIR schools are 5 percentage points higher than our non-CIR schools, and certified and classified vacancy rates for charters are 4 percentage points higher than public schools. So this graph has the same characteristics, but it is showing the average number of vacancies at the school level. So same characteristics as the previous slide. Across Louisiana, there's an average of 1.8 certified and 1.1 classified vacancies that exist at each school site. The average number of certified and classified vacancies is highest in our combination schools. The average number of vacancies at charter schools for both classified and certified is about double that of traditional schools. And then looking at the data by school letter grade and CIR status, as I mentioned before, sites with D or F letter grades and labeled CIR have a higher average number of vacant positions. This graph displays the data for you to see by school system, and it's talking about the size of the school system, the geographic area, and the school system letter grade. In terms of size of the school system, our smaller systems have a higher rate of vacancies. In terms of grouping by rural or urban, our rural systems have higher certified vacancy rates, and our urban systems have higher classified vacancy rates. And then lastly, looking at the data through the lens of a school systems letter grade, systems labeled as D or F have higher vacancy rates in certified positions, and then our B and F districts have a higher vacancy rate for classified positions. This graph shows the same characteristics as the previous slide, but it is now showing the average number of vacancies at each characteristic across school systems. So across Louisiana, school systems have an average of 18.2 certified and 11.1 classified vacancies. For systems with 40 or more schools, the average number of vacancies in those systems is higher than our smaller systems. Our urban systems have a higher average of vacancies compared to rural, and then our A, B, and C systems have higher average vacancies than D and F systems. The second section of the survey asked HR directors to respond to the total and vacant positions according to whether they were full-time or part-time. And according to the data reported, part-time vacancy rates were higher than in full-time positions, and the vacancy rates for non-classroom teachers, classified staff, and bus drivers were similar regardless if they were full or part-time. This graph shows the job type by full and part-time vacancy rates. So you'll see 5% of full-time, 7% of part-time teacher positions are vacant in Louisiana. 2% of our full-time and 6% of our part-time school leader positions are vacant. 7% of full-time and 3% of part-time vacancies exist in other roles. And then our non-classroom teachers, classified staff, and bus drivers have the same vacancy rates for full and part-time. The next section of the survey had HR directors indicate if the position type was easy, somewhat difficult, or very difficult to fill. 68% of responses indicate that school leader positions were easy to fill. 65% of responses indicated bus drivers were very difficult to fill, and 53% noted classroom teachers were also very difficult to fill. This graph shares the level of difficulty by job type, and as mentioned earlier, the most difficult positions to fill were bus drivers and classroom teachers. The last section of the survey asked HR directors to select the strategies they use to fill those vacancies. The most commonly used strategies included asking current employees to take on additional responsibilities, using long-term substitutes, and then posting job opportunities on social media. And the least common strategies were expanding benefits or including performance measures during the hiring process. And then this graph displays all of the options that HR directors had to select from to fill those vacancies, ordered from the most commonly used to least commonly used. And then just to wrap up, as I mentioned earlier, this is the first time we've collected data like this at all, and so this is going to be helpful as we make decisions and develop strategy around the 28 recommendations that the Recruitment, Recovery, and Retention Task Force approved, and also help us as we develop a long-term strategy on a more robust data collection process across the state related to our workforce data.
Dr. Brown, you have a comment?
Yeah, just one comment. I just want to call to attention the limitations of the data, and I appreciate this group for making the presentation, but it is limited to the ability of essentially HR directors who already have very busy jobs completing surveys. And then whenever we talk about our estimate on the total number of vacancies, that's using 74% of surveys collected and then making estimations on the 26% that was not submitted to get to 25-20 of total vacancies in the state. So I just want to call that out. I mean, this is the best data that we have, but we're not sharing it with 100% confidence in its accuracy. But it is certainly, I think, good data for a talking point. And I think probably 2520 or 2,520 is a good number, at least for the general public to understand around vacancies in the state. Because if you just take 20 or 25 or 30 students in each of those positions would impact you around 50,000 kids, give or take, one way or the other. So it is a significant impact, the fact that we have 2,520 estimated vacancies.
Ms. Boucher?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a question. On the certified teacher, y'all do count the TATs as certified, correct? In this, if the teacher, I think when we sent to them, we asked that question, and they said, if you had a teacher on a TAT, count them as a filled position rather than a vacant position. So,
If a teacher was in the position, yes. We did not include if a substitute was in that position, because that's not a teacher. So
well, a TAT the TAT is a temporary authority to teach. In order to get a TAT, all you have to do is have a college degree and either have made a 22 on the ACT or passed reading and writing of the praxis core, not even the math part of the core, before we even got to the content area. So a lot of school systems in these figures, we have seen a tremendous increase in positions where we have had to apply for temporary authority to teach, meaning we have a college graduate, but with absolutely zero training in teaching. Has never taken an education course, knows nothing about instructional strategies. I mean, just coming fresh out with a college degree and no training whatsoever. So I think one of the things, and really the department having to do this so quickly and getting the first round of information is very, very difficult. But if we're going to paint the real picture of what we consider a teacher shortage, because as I've said several times, I still have vacancies that I have not filled all year long, not even with a person that I can put on a TAT to put into the classroom. And that is the first time that has happened in my district since I've been superintendent. That's a long time, 18 years. But at that point, those people who can be bright young people, who have their degrees, and either scored well on the ACT or passed that minimum praxis, we are putting in classrooms to teach our students, and we're having to work with them year long in how to be an effective teacher and to learn the curriculum, to learn the strategies. So at some point, if we're getting and beginning to accumulate more data, take a look at those positions that are being filled with teachers who have had training versus people that we're putting in there who had absolutely no training. And the long-term positions, I mean, it's great when we have people going out on pregnancy leave. That means we have future children coming up to educate, or not so great when they have medical issues, whatever. But we have a constant number of teachers who are on leave for one reason or another, and it's extremely difficult to put people into the classrooms who do have training and background in order to teach. And I think some of the charter school high numbers, or they don't require that teachers be certified. So I think that's a difference. Some charters do require that or shoot for that, and others don't. So that might be a little bit of a reason why there might be some differences in the charters versus the more traditional systems. But to really look at, do we have a certified teacher in every classroom? Hopefully we could get the stat in the future that a teacher who has really been trained and fully certified as opposed to just a temporary hire.
Dr. Davis? First, I'd like to say congratulations on your response rate, because any survey firm in the country would be thrilled to have one that's as high as you got. The data nerd in me wants to know, when you were estimating for the schools that did not complete, like trying to come up with a reasonable number of how many vacancies they might have, did you use matching to similarly situated districts? We can talk about that later in a break. But my two comments and questions pertain to the vacancy rates by job type. When we look at the 7% of part-time teachers vacancies that are there, and this pertains to the upcoming legislative session, do we know if there are any bills dealing with teacher retirement that might help us with luring retired teachers into those part-time positions? And then my second question is, I'd just like to be aware as we're taking positions on pieces of legislation that the number one thing that districts are doing is asking current employees to take on additional responsibilities. And there's a lot of legislation that's asking our teachers to do a lot more than they're doing now in terms of posting lesson plans, et cetera. And so things like this need to come into play as we're taking positions on upcoming legislation. Mr. Garvey?
Yes, I have a question, an issue directed to the superintendent. We see that there are some schools where vacancy rates are higher. B&F schools being a particular note. Back when you were superintendent of Jefferson Parish, you got a tax pass, I think I mentioned this earlier, passed overwhelmingly too. And one of the key aspects of the tax increase was that it was going to pay some teachers more or extra money or bonuses to agree to teach in these low-ranking schools. Do we know how many other districts are doing that other than Jefferson Parish? And I say that thinking that we don't, and the real question is, can you put together for us a report showing which districts are doing that and which districts are not?
Yeah, I would not know the number of systems throughout the state doing that, but we're happy to try and explore that.
Could you maybe bring that in April, or would you need till June to do that?
I hate to make a commitment at this point, but certainly by June we can look to have something for you. If we can get it sooner, we will.
Would that need a motion, or can we just get it today?
We're good.
Thank you.
Dr. Bovee?
I want to thank you for this survey, of course, and just remind people that teachers are the #1 in-school factor affecting outcomes for students. So we can have the best standards in the world, the best assessment in the world, but if we do not have strong teachers with our students, then they're not going to achieve to their potential. And so I think I was interested in doing the calculation. I think you shared the number before I even did the calculation, that this means about 50,000 students in our state do not have a teacher, basically. The vacancies that we're talking about, that we have 50,000 students in our state that do not have a teacher. And I would just encourage people to continue to highlight this as one of the most important issues that we're facing. And then I think we are going to have to come together as a state, as a board, as a department, as a state, to help figure this out. And I know that there are things there's a lot of things that are impacting the situation, but that I do think it's critical that we come together and come up with some solutions. One question I did have, and I don't know, I think because it's the first time you did this survey, I don't know if it's possible, but I wonder if there are any exemplars. I know there was this concept that I encountered one time when you're trying to solve a problem, right? Instead of coming up with a solution that you've never seen before, is identify people who are having success, right? And so, have you seen any exemplars in this work of districts where you saw that, wait a minute, their vacancy list is a lot lower than anyone else's. And I would just say that if that's the case, I would encourage us to study those. I know, Mr. Garvey talked about the work in Jefferson Parish. Is that truly making a difference? Is the vacancy rate in our CIR schools in Jefferson Parish lower because teachers get paid more? Because it's not easy, right? Because I think we have a lot of things working against us. The point that you made about the CIR schools experiencing the vacancies to a greater extent than our other schools is, I think, the key to the problems we have in this state, right? Our kids who need the best teachers don't even have teachers. And so I would be interested in knowing if anybody's figured this out, if they have, what they're doing about it, and also just working with anyone in the state who has come up with some potential solutions. I've talked before about the fact that we do have teachers who have retired, and what is it going to take? I mean, the great thing about a retired teacher is they have the training in place. Ms. Boucher talked about those who are on the TAT, the temporary authority to teach. Well, they're going to need a lot of training to get where they need. And so I think as we look at these solutions, we have to certainly prioritize them for our schools with the greatest challenge. So thank you for this work. Know that I'm deeply interested. I'm not going to get into the level of detail about the data that Dr. Davis will, but I certainly am interested in discussing the solutions and potential solutions with you. Thank you.
Any other comments, discussion?
I just have one more that CEAP met, I think it was last week, and we talked about the difficulties that we're having in filling special education positions. And so I'm assuming we didn't parse vacancies out like that in the data. But I just really like for us to think as we're thinking about changes that might make these roads easier. I know that we have individuals who are serving as special education teachers on the temporary 3-year ability that they have to do that. And so my question would be, what are we as districts and also here at the department doing to help those teachers who've already had 3 years of experience in a special education position get the proper certifications and stay in those positions because we need them so much. And then also Mr. Molassma can tell me about the retirement thing too. Thank you.
Mr. Morris. Sorry, Mr. Morris. Do you want to?
Yeah, so just wanted to echo my colleague's comments and thank you guys for conducting the survey. It's the first time it's been done, so really appreciate the effort. And just want to go out to Superintendent Brumley, this is something that you guys would consider doing on an annual basis or maybe more frequently.
Well, we hope that moving forward through some of the ways in which we are going to be collecting data, that we don't have to do it in this way moving forward. We're hoping to, Mr. Lambert and his team are working to hopefully build a more sophisticated approach to doing this.
Okay, thank you. So that speaks to the method of retrieving the data. I wanted to recognize whoever put the committee schedule together today, because I thought it was very timely to schedule this one before the NFP discussion. Because when we get to the NFP discussion and we talk about recommendations for teacher salaries, I think there's 2 components to that conversation. One is the traditional annual conversation about reaching the Southern Regional average, and then the other is the issue that we're speaking about right now, which is the teacher shortage and how do we retain those teachers as well as recruit new ones. And I think that this data goes a long way to making sure that our legislators have a full picture. So I'm wondering if when we get to that discussion, I want to get ahead of myself a little bit here, when we get to that discussion, we consider some sort of accompanying letter with the NFP proposal so that we include this data to support that recommendation and make a clear case for both of those scenarios.
Mr. Castillo?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to follow up on Mr. Garvey's request of the superintendent. It's a good question as it relates to what other districts have also offered additional pay for CIR schools and schools that have these vacancy rates. But I'd also like to know if it's not already being done, Dr. Brumley, whether it's working. So if additional pay is being offered, like in Jefferson and other parishes, does that actually work? Do teachers choose those schools with the additional compensation? And whether that ends up having an impact once you do your analysis?
Yeah, I think just anecdotally, even in the two systems where I can personally speak, not intending to speak for other systems, but it was a put your foot in the water type situation. I really think that the amount of dollars that you have to do towards that has to be a significant dollar amount to make people make a movement. Because pay is not the number one thing for teachers, but it certainly is an important thing. So I believe that you have to have a significant dollar contribution to be the incentive for that to work. But again, we'll see how it plays out. That's just my general call. Thank you.
Ms. Bochet?
Years ago, we had tried that situation, we offer, and I guess this was prior to Katrina, that's how far back this goes, but monies to teach in what at that time, we only had a couple of schools that were economically disadvantaged with high rates and such. We didn't have CIO and UIR at the time, but the economically disadvantaged, and we did not get our more veteran, capable teachers to transfer over to those schools because there were so many other factors that they considered. Now, we didn't make it 10,000 or 15,000 or maybe something very significantly more. Now, since then, the demographics of our community, the community I'm in, has changed. So every one of my schools fall up as a high-need school, and I've got a district grade of like 82% economically disadvantaged. So it really wouldn't make that much of a difference with my particular situation. But what we're finding, and for the first, we never ever had a problem filling vacancies in elementary schools. And right now, most of the prospective teachers coming out of the colleges and universities, and when you see the statistics of what's coming out of the colleges and universities, the number one certification is just elementary and pre-K 3 and 1 to 5. You know, those we really don't have a significant problem in filling. But when you get into the upper levels, and primarily in high school, and not only in special ed across the board, but in your maths and sciences and more technical areas where there are opportunities out in the community and other areas for people to go that can show competence in those particular areas. Those are our most difficult to fill. And if you're talking paying more for those particular vacancies, you have to pay significantly more to attract people into those particular areas in that setting. So as far as DNF schools go, I mean, the way, I guess I'm just going to say this, if we take a look at the economically disadvantaged rates in our DNF schools and the economically disadvantaged rates in our A and B schools, you're going to see a vast significant difference. So they need good teachers, but more so, we need a more balanced student body if you're looking for an increase in the accountability of. I mean, I think what we should really study is any A school that has an economically disadvantaged rate over 75%. And then we could see what is really making a difference. Because you look at all our DNF schools, and you're going to see significantly high economically disadvantaged rates. You look at our A schools, and they're going to be lower. And if the anomaly exists, then we need to take a look and do some research on why is this school doing much better than expected with the rates, high rates of economically disadvantaged or special education students with disabilities. And so a lot of that is not necessarily the best teachers in those schools, because I've been in D schools where I feel, and I think that people who are educators around here can say, They've been in schools that don't score as high, and they have much better teaching going on, much better growth going on, and it's not their letter grade that's determining the quality of the teaching that's going on in the school. There's a lot of other factors involved.
Thank you, Ms. Boucher. Ms. Tedesco?
Thank you. I wanted to echo the sentiments of thanking Dr. Brumley and Ms. Cooper and the department for beginning this valuable research and for trying to create information that is so quantifiable and discussable by many different parties. When we think about the number of teachers that are impacted by this effort and then multiply it by the number of students, it is beyond significant. And I think what some of our board members were saying earlier was that possibly the impact is even greater than the research shows. And I want to express my thanks for your bringing this forward and to say, on behalf of the teaching body, I do not think the solution is to ask our teachers to do more, but to find stronger, significant ways to support our teachers and thank them for the work that they are doing across all kinds of districts and all kinds of schools. And I think, as Ms. Boucher was saying, looking for the opportunities to find where things are working and growth is happening would be a really strong option. So, thank you.
Mr. Castillo?
So I want to follow up on Ms. Boucher's last comments and the last committee meeting. One of the great opportunities that we have, for example, with Charter School USA, is that there are two schools are in two different areas of Lafayette, one with a more economically disadvantaged and one with a more advantaged population. And so part of the rationale behind some of the charter school laws that exist was to create an opportunity for us to be able to research models that have been successful. So if we assume that Charter School USA, for example, has done well in both affluent neighborhoods and disadvantaged neighborhoods, what do we learn from that? Let's assume that's the case. And I don't have all of the data in front of us, in front of me. But to Ms. Boucher's point, are we really mining the data to look at those schools that have developed models in those areas and what drives teachers there? What are the reasons why schools are successful or aren't successful when they have that significant economic disadvantaged population? I think I've heard lots of conversations around it anecdotally, but I don't know to what extent have we drilled down and done a great deal of analysis to say what works, what doesn't work, and if it works, how do we then apply it more broadly and scale it up either within a region or across the state. And there may be some opportunities, but just given the conversation we had before and the conversation now, there may be some opportunities to learn and apply some of those results to the extent that we're not already doing so.
Mr. Morris?
I had two other comments. The first one was the report. I got Dr. Brumley's number, 2,500 students, but the report doesn't speak to the substitute teacher capacity. So that's a concern I have. I wouldn't want anyone to come to the conclusion that, okay, we've got these vacancies, but we can cover the substitutes. So if we could, as we share this information outside this group, if we could get some clarity there. And then Ms. Tedesco's comment about adding additional load to our teachers. You know, I just want to share with the board from my personal experience working as a substitute, what I've seen is that there's a schedule that's put out every day, and every teacher is listed on the schedule, and certain teachers have to use their planning period to cover these vacancies. So that's putting more stress, and these teachers are already stressed out. And then on top of that, in some schools, that doesn't cover the vacancy. So what they do now is they take the classrooms with no teacher, and they break that group of 30 into groups of 5, and now they're adding 5 more students to your class of 30 kids. So as a teacher now, I've got 30 kids with base instruction. Now I've got another 5 with some other curriculum that they're supposed to be getting instructional minutes on, and they're obviously not. So again, you're adding more stress to the teacher population. So the point here is just that, as we share this information outside of this group, we can somehow add that conversation about substitute capacity, and in fact, it is quite limited today. And because of that, it's putting additional pressure on our teachers. The last comment I had was, Superintendent Brumley, when we talk about these potential for annual data inquiries, so that we stay on top of this, we don't have this problem every year going forward. I wondered about a succession plan. Most organizations I'm familiar working with of this size, they've got a succession plan in place, so there's some, so this data does come in every year, number one. And then secondly, there's a forecast in place for the number of retirees that are anticipated and other things that may be symptomatic to the system. But if there's any consideration to gathering this data on a regular basis now, and then start to develop some sort of succession plan. Just curious your thoughts on that. Is that something that is feasible or worth pursuing?
We're happy to have additional conversation around that. Mr. Lambert and his team are working on, again, as I said, a more sophisticated data set. And so once we have that, I think we'll be in a better position to do what you're asking us to do. While I have the mic, I want to recognize one of the comments Mr. Castile said. It reminded me, and as I saw very early with cable, Barry's here. They previously would recognize high poverty, high performance schools. So they would take the schools that were in the highest levels of poverty in the state and cross-reference against those with the highest performance. They would have a collection of schools, and then they would zero focus on those schools and call people in to review those schools. And so, it might be something worthy that also I could have a follow-up conversation with Mr. Irwin around, also kicking that back off as an additional measure to highlight some of the work around high poverty, high performance.
Great idea.
Ms. Holloway, thank you. Dr. Brumley, I'm not quite sure when this occurred, but it was before your time, that there was some AG money dedicated for a study with high poverty, high performing schools. I don't recall, it's very wrong, about the results, the outcome, and whether there was some training for leaders to connect, like some of these conversations have been staying here. So maybe if you could check into that.
Yeah, we'll probably look back and see what we can find.
What they have. Okay, thank you.
We do have public comment. Mike Falk with the Louisiana Association of School Superintendents, if he would like to speak.
Can Mr. Walsall say something about the retirement bills for part-time positions, if there's anything out there?
Go ahead.
Thank you. So as you know, the legislative session filing deadline happened on Friday. So we have a very large amount of bills that were filed in the legislature this year. We're tracking close to about 200 of them. You'll get your tracker list tomorrow. That way you can also review them and give feedback on them as you see fit. But there are a cluster of bills that are focused on the teacher shortage, both in the long term and in the short term. One of those is the retirement bills. There are currently 3 or 4 retirement bills that deal specifically with changing the level from 25% of the previous salary to 50%. One of those bills, which is one that the department had a lot of input on, was House Bill 22 by Rick Edmonds, which takes that 25 to the 50%, which is in line with the lasers program that they have for people returning to work. But it puts a 3-year limit on it at first. This was done that way we can hope that it gets through Senate retirement easier, because Senate retirement, 2 of the things they don't want to do is you don't want to change retirement patterns and you don't want to impact the actuary. So we were trying to stay within those bounds. That way, if this does help, we can come back within 3 years and extend that if it's possible. Or they can see that it works and they want to keep it going better in line with the lasers program. Also, that way we don't change retirement patterns in the future for this. It applies to anyone who has retired prior to December 31st, 2021. So this is for our current retired teachers who have left service already. That way we don't impact the future ones to incentivize early retirement to be able to come back to the system.
Answer the question.
Yeah. All right,
When the retirement was amended in 2020,
Yes, ma'am.
we used to have a critical shortage clause in there that said if we advertised and for full-time positions and we did not get any currently certified people, then we could pull a person out of retirement to fill that critical shortage area. Well, that worked in some cases well for us. And then when the bill was changed, or the bill was amended, the law was amended in 2020, it wiped out that provision. And I was talking with one of our state senators who actually said he didn't even realize they had done that. And that has hurt, in some cases, our ability to go back. It's one thing to raise the percentage from 25% to 50%, but that doesn't fill a position. That gives you it's only 25 or 50%, not even of what they would have earned, but of their retirement benefit, which is an actually reduced benefit. It's not what they would have made if they were working full-time. So those dollars, while it's helpful, might get you through pregnancy, maternity leave replacement, or medical leave replacement, but it doesn't fill a vacant position, not even in the short term. So there is something that we have to be able to do that will, in the short term, hopefully until we can get more people going in education, that we can solve the problem in the short term. And that critical shortage provision really was helpful, and all of a sudden, in 2020,
Yes,
got eliminated. Do we have any will to put that back in?
So that is something that we have had conversations with PRSL and some state senators. We're still in those conversations. So just retirement bills have to be filed by January 29th to make sure that we advertise properly. We've had those discussions with them. The understanding is in 2020 there was kind of like a swap to be able to make that happen. So we're still working through that of why that had happened. Now, if you go back, my understanding is that when the critical rate, sorry, wrong topic. When the critical shortage happened, we had a lot of bills on that too, so that's also when the critical shortage happened, when they removed that in 2020, my understanding is that you could still use the population of retirees that retired before 2020
Before 2010.
Before the previous group could still be used for critical shortage, but that will continue to shrink. It will shrink, exactly. So what's happening right now, since 2020, you have a new group of retirees that are within those constraints. So we are in the conversations of trying to figure out how we can fix that, because we've heard that the critical shortage is really one of the helpful things in getting teachers back into the classroom.
And it is a short-term solution here, but we need every little short-term piece we can get until this whole issue is hopefully resolved in some way to encourage more of our young people to go into the teaching professions.
Yes, ma'am. And so that's something that I can keep you up to date on as we move through with those conversations.
So we're in discussions trying to get that put back?
We are talking to them to see if there is an opportunity for us to do that, where do we just have to get someone to agree to it. The Senate Retirement Committee is really kind of where the bills stop. So we're just trying to see if we can get anything through the system to be able to.
Talk to me afterward.
We sure.
That might do that.
Yes, ma'am, we'll do. So those are the retirement bills. They all are similarly written the same, where it changes it from 25 to 50. Ours just has a few stipulations on it to try to help it get through the process.
Thank you.
No problem.
All right, Mr. Falk?
Lively discussion here. I serve on the Teacher Retention Recruitment Task Force representing the superintendents, and him and the department have really provided a lot of information. But let me let you put it in perspective. This is not just unique to Louisiana. It is a common thread across the nation. We have a national State Executive Directors Association, and over 30 of the states in the country are facing this issue. Some of them have already taken steps by extending the retiree return to work. Some of them have limited, some of them have sunset. There are some things going on in our state. And Ethan mentioned Representative Edmonds' bill, and it's from our understanding that that one probably has the strongest chance of being able to go through the whole process because it has a sunset, which is very attractive. We are currently working with a state senator to address the critical shortage provision. Number one, the advertising is a killer, where you have to advertise in your journal twice on subsequent weeks. Most districts right now have a website. We want to use that as an opportunity to meet that requirement and just do it once. The other thing, there's a provision that if you retired from 2010 to 2020 and you worked one time in a critical shortage, that you could work again. But we want to try to make a provision that from 2010 to 2020 that you can work in a critical shortage, and that would help fill the gap. But alluding to the report, the numbers we anticipate will be greater at the end of the year. Most school systems sent out intents in the spring, seeking information from employees. Will you return? Will you retire? What have you? So they kind of have an idea on the number of vacancies they potentially have, and they can work on staffing. That doesn't take into account the ones that over the summer that might decide to retire, that they're married to a spouse and that spouse is transferred somewhere else, and they have to resign because of relocation. Now, I'm fixing to tell my age right now. There used to be a provision where you could hire a person on a 665 circular. Doris is probably, in Sandy, y'all remember that. Well, when I was in Morehouse Parish, I had a large percentage of my employees in the classroom that were hired on that because they couldn't get certified. They had to be paid beginning teacher salary. Well, we would train them for 3 to 4 years. They'd get certified, and the districts next to us would hire them because they were fully certified, but we had spent all the time training and getting them ready. The percentages in smaller districts, when you have a vacancy in a smaller district, the impact on that district is greater than maybe a larger district. I'll give you an example. Tensall Parish at one time, there's 491 students there. At one time, they had no certified teachers. They started hiring retirees from Mississippi, and now they are beginning to have some retired teachers. Substitutes. School districts are finding more and more difficulty in placing substitutes in the classroom. People don't want to do it. COVID was partially responsible to that. The other thing is it's such a demand, and Mr. Morris is experiencing personally what it is to be like a substitute in the class. Bus drivers. Bus drivers shortage is an immediate problem right now. And the thing there is you can't go to privatization of your bus system without suffering a significant penalty in the retirement system. That's the reason when I started the central school system, I privatized buses, I privatized custodian, I privatized as much as I could because of the potential impact if I ever wanted to change financially. The bills that Ethan mentioned, yes, they are out there.
Mr. Hall, can you wrap up?
Yes, ma'am, I am. And we're going to work closely with him, and we're going to work with the legislature to try to help this. And the recruitment task force, we have some good things for the future, but right now, we have some issues in the immediate, very near future. Thank you.
Thank you. Any more discussion?
Yeah, Mr. Volk mentioned the bus driver shortage. I have firsthand experience with the teacher shortage, but I'm just curious, how do we handle a situation whenever we don't have the bus drivers? How does that work?
Everyone drives a bus. Mr. Morris, my coaches, Lee.
Do I sign a CDL, is that what you're saying?
This is why your state superintendent retains the CDLs. You double the routes, you call in, if you're fortunate to have activity drivers, you call them in, you have, and then you have an academic issue too, because potentially you're asking people who are classroom teachers to run routes, and it may interfere with the time limits they're supposed to be in the classroom, so it's a significant issue.
Ms. O'Shea.
Just anecdotally, every day, okay, every day, some bus drivers are out. Now, we own, in our system, we own our own buses, so we don't have all that operational knowledge issue that you're seeing on the news right now in some particular school systems. But every day, people are out, and our elementary kids, they get the little wristbands, make sure they get on the right buses and all that kind of stuff. We have to take instructional time and what we call split buses. We need to say, okay, if you're riding bus 98-2 today, you're going to be going home on, 99-3, and we're sending all that information out at the elementary level. The kids then have to make sure the 4-year-olds get on the right bus, the 5-year-olds get on the right bus, the 6-year-olds. It's not as much, but when you're listening to announcements for the older kids, they're not paying attention, dialing into the bus they actually get on when they're out there trying to get home or whatever. So the bus driver shortage is significant. And we train, not only in St. Bernard do we have our Teach St. Bernard where we certify our own teachers, we train our own bus drivers. So we have those licenses, and we constantly advertise and talk at our board meetings. Anybody who wants to be a bus driver, come and we will train you. We will help you get your CDL. We will administer part of the test, and we're here. So, and those are tough because you can put someone in a classroom who has no training. You can't put anybody to drive that bus. You don't have the proper credentials and licenses.
Yes, bus drivers are important. I'm glad I don't have my CDL for that. So I think this concludes comments. I did want to make a quick comment. We're talking about bus drivers, teachers. I think it was most concerning for me to hear that the strategy most schools are taking is to give those people, those doing the most in your schools, extra duties. And I can't tell you how many times I have to do that every single day. So, that's concerning for me, but at the same time, public education should not be something that relies on asking people just to, can you help me out today? This is important work, and we've got to figure out a way to do a better job to recruit people, figure out why we're missing, so many teachers and bus drivers. And the radio every morning on my way to school is announcing for bus drivers, if you're looking for a part-time job with benefits, come be a bus driver. So clearly this is everywhere. I don't think this is a Louisiana issue, but I appreciate you all doing this work for us to have this good discussion. Are there any more comments, or do we have any objections to this motion? Hearing none, motion passes. Next item, please.
The next item is on page 10. Item 3.1, consideration of an update report regarding the Teacher Certification Appeals Council. The recommendation is to approve the appointment of Dr. Christine Hippolyte, a member representing LAICU, to the membership of TCAT for a 4-year term from 2022 to 2026.
Can I get a motion?
Motion.
Ms. Orange-Jones, Mr. Garvey? Is there any discussion on this item? No? Hearing none? Any opposed? Okay, motion passes. Next item, please.
The next item is on page 11, item 4.1, consideration of revisions to bulletins regarding the issuance and sanction of Louisiana Educator credentials. The department recommendation is to approve as notices of intent, revisions to bulletin 718 and 746, and the repeal of bulletin 745, chapter 1, and bulletin 746, chapter 9.
May I get a motion? Ms. Holloway, Dr. Davis. Is there any discussion on this item? No? No presentations? All right.
Ms. Adams?
Yes, Mr. Miller.
Ms. Calvin, I don't know if you're the individual or Dr. Chason, or Dr. Bumley. Just a quick question. I know the changes are largely procedural, but if somebody can just clarify that we're not actually changing what offenses would prohibit someone from obtaining a degree, or Ms. Davis, I'm not sure who's the best person for this, but just there's been some concerns that this is allowing individuals that currently would be prohibited from seeking an appeal or something to.
Shane Davis, Bessie Executive Director. This is in no way changing the convictions that qualify for appeal. This is strictly moving it to a new section, and then we're also adding sanctions for cheating and adding some definitions in 118 for specific terms related to administration of tests and cheating. So we had no mechanism for someone who was revoked for cheating to come back to the board on an appeal after a waiting period. And what would satisfy, we had nothing to show satisfaction of rehabilitation. So we're adding some things for that as far as someone being allowed to appeal, what they would have to do, and what are possibilities for sanctions on their certificates.
Oh, thank you.
Any other discussion? Hearing none. Do we have any objections to the motion? All right, motion passes. Next item, please.
The next item is on page 39, item 4.2, consideration of revisions to bulletin 996, standards for approval of teacher and/or educational leader preparation programs regarding the teacher preparation quality rating system. The department recommendation is to approve as notice of intent revisions to bulletin 996 and approve a waiver of policy for the 2020-2021 school year due to lack of BAM data needed for calculation of performance profiles.
Can I get a motion? Ms. Orange Jones, seconded by Doris O'Shea. Thank you. Any comments from the department or discussion? Mr. Garvey?
Yeah, I apologize for not being totally familiar with all the aspects of this item. But if I remember right, and I'd like to look to Ms. Bopey, if I remember right, we used to rate preparation systems based on how their teachers, or their graduates did on the first 2 or 3 or 5 years after graduating. Are we still rating preparation systems that way?
Well, it's a comprehensive approach that includes a number of things. Happy to have one, Dr. Chasson, or a member of your team, come up and speak more to that. I think Ms. Cooper can speak. And keep in mind with this proposal, we will still be calculating a simulated score and having those conversations with the providers so that they know the status of where they are, even given information we don't have.
So there are 3 pieces of the system: the program experience, meeting educator workforce needs, and then teacher quality, like you're talking about, so for the teacher's performance with students. So all 3 of those pieces are what are used to give them a rating.
It might be helpful if you just talk us through, I mean, there's some things where you struck through and you're adding and changing the language that is some pretty significant shifts. It might be helpful if you just talk us through the rationale for that. I think that's what Mr. Garvey's really questioning is what is this doing and why?
Sure, so when we rolled out the learning phases for the quality rating system, we also created a working group of teacher prep providers to give feedback on the process and to share what we've learned over those learning phases. And so based on that feedback and from the work group, they recommended these changes. And so one of those changes includes shifting from a 4-year or 2-year on-site review cycle to have everyone on a 4-year on-site review cycle. This means that programs rated below a 3 would run on a 4-year cycle, and programs that are rated above a 3 would experience no change. So this would be a change for those that are rated below a 3. Previously, they would have gone to every 2 years, but now we are saying they should be every 4 years with the systems that rate above a 3. The profile now becomes more supportive rather than punitive with this change. So programs will have more time to implement the feedback and recommendations from that on-site review in order to make continuous improvements in their programs. Another reason was the on-site review is one piece of that rating, and that may not have been the reason for their low score. So to have a second on-site review 2 years later may not be what that program needs. Also, providers that have multiple pathways and programs would be on the same cycle now, so it's eliminating a lot of additional work for providers who have more than one program. And then also, to meet the needs of programs, the change would include progress monitoring and support options, where that didn't before, to really help them improve their program. So that is what that shift would mean for providers.
Thank you.
Sure. Dr. Bovey, can you tell me more about what the progress monitoring would entail? Because when I hear you say we are going to take people who scored lower and instead look at them more often to everybody's going to be on the same cycle, I'm concerned about the lack of differentiation based on need. So I want to feel better about this, so I'd like to know more about the progress monitoring.
So what the progress monitoring does is expand the options. So right now, the only thing would have been, we'll give you another on-site review in 2 years, and it may not be that their on-site review score was low. So it wouldn't be helpful to that provider. What the progress monitoring would do would provide multiple options for progress monitoring. Having another on-site review would be one of those options, but other things may include enacting different improvement recommendations, limiting enrollment to their pathway, discontinuing their ability to recommend a candidate for certification, or really other things that we recommend to you all if that happens. So it would be a plan based on that specific provider and not a one-size-fits-all.
And how is that decision going to be made?
So after the data is collected from each provider, we look at that as a team internally, and we have conversations with those providers. So what we would imagine doing here is that would be developed together and then recommended to you all about what that program's improvement plan would look like.
So you as the department would work together internally, and then you bring that to the board.
And then you all would decide.
Does the policy that you have here require for you to bring into the board?
I would need to double check. I think it does say that it would come to Bessie for approval.
They're nodding in the audience, if that helps.
Thank you, Everett. Thank you for the reference.
It's number 2, Dr. Bovey, under D, I think.
Okay, so we're changing some of the language. We're going from a 2-year cycle for people who score programs that score lower to everybody being on the same. And then we're creating a door to more options for what support looks like in this process. Okay. I can tell you the part that makes me feel better is that the support would mimic, or the support has the opportunity to be better connected to where the struggle is. So I really like and appreciate that. I do have concerns moving away from, for extending the timeline for programs that are struggling. I mean, that's concerning to me.
Meaning for the more frequent on-site review.
Well, it's an accountability cycle, so I'm reading from the top where it says C. Each teacher preparation program shall move to a 4-year accountability cycle for each pathway at the conclusion of the first accountability cycle. So the way I read that, and I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but the way I read that is, basically if you're struggling, you're gonna struggle over a 4-year period of time instead of a 2-year period of time.
So this would allow all of those options that we just talked about for those programs that are struggling. One of those options could be that they do get an on-site review every 2 years. And I think that's what you're saying, is they wouldn't get it until another 4 years. So they still could, it's just not required in policy. It would be an option for those programs.
So in the first part, it's what gets struck out, right? Is the part that's getting struck out is the quality rating of level 3 or above shall move to a 4-year. So I think the part that we're striking out here that I'm struggling with is for the preparation programs that are not doing as well as the others and putting them on the same timeline as everybody else. Now, if you can assure me that they're still going to get the support they need to improve, because I don't want us to wait 4 years to have a conversation about improvement. I think if we need to improve, those conversations need to be more frequent, not less.
So I think what you're saying is for the renewal, not for the on-site review. So every 2 years, there would still be a renewal decision, but the on-site review would not be a 2 or 4 year option. Everyone would move to 4 year unless part of their progress monitoring includes an additional on-site review.
And that's what I need, is the commitment that we're helping people improve.
And that's really what the focus of this conversation was. It was moving from what seemed to be very punitive without much support to making this a really supportive process to improve our program so that we're getting better quality teachers and getting better outcomes for kids.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? Yeah, some clarity on what was just discussed, 2 year, 4 year, plus the national accreditation at the university level. Can you clarify some information? Because if I recall, the deans had questions or concerns about the, 2 parts here that they had to do.
Correct. So they were concerned that having accreditation plus possibly every 2 years having an on-site review would be very overwhelming for their teams and also limit the amount of changes they can make in a short amount of time. And so the discussion with them in this work group was for that reason. So moving to every 4 years would just really relieve the burden of a lot of the things that they had to do with multiple reviews. So they were part of this discussion, and the work group approved that, and that was one of the things that they mentioned.
Yeah. And they still have to have national accreditation?
They do.
They do.
They do.
Ms. Fauché, let me just clarify a minute for myself. The on-site review, you're talking about when, what is the group who's doing it right now?
Class measures.
Class measures, right? Who, by the way, is much better than the first group that y'all had. I have a program that undergoes these reviews. So when you're talking about the on-site review, you're talking about when class measures comes on, and you can liken it to when you get maybe an advanced ed review or a certification review. A team of people come down, they observe all the different classrooms, they are looking for certain indicators, and that's half the way your teacher preparation program is assessed. The other half of the measure has to do with, well, MAP scores of teachers in the program, if we had them, And then do you service high-need schools and certain certification areas that are high-need certification areas that you outline? So to me, this is good in that on-site review is a lot to prepare for, because just think of it as going through an accreditation review every 2 years. So a 4-year period is good for that. And if there are, because you may have, part of your program, you may have a problem with one of the other indicators. So an whole on-site review process really isn't beneficial for the program if the other indicators are maybe your source of weakness that you need to improve upon. So you have the option to call in the whole committee again, or to work on the other indicators where you may have fallen short. So, if that's helpful.
Any more discussion? Okay, do we have any objections to the motion? Hearing none, the motion passes. Next item.
The next item is on page 63, item 6.1, consideration of executive session regarding discussion of the character, professional competence, or physical or mental health of a person in accordance with Louisiana Revised Statute 4216 for the following individuals: Dr. Shonda DeQuanita Ford, Tabitha Mae Newbert Benson, Ted Eric Romero, Alexa S. Ginn.
Can I get a motion to go into executive session? Ms. Orange Jones, Mr. Garvey? Is there any public comment or more discussion on this matter before we take a roll call? Okay. In order for this motion to pass, 2/3 affirmative vote of members present is required. May I have a roll call, please?
Dr. Bovee? Yes. Mr. Castillo?
Yes.
Dr. Davis? Yes. Ms. Ellis?
Yes.
Mr. Garvey?
Yes.
Ms. Holloway?
Yes.
Mr. Mallory?
Yes.
Mr. Morris?
Yes.
Ms. Orange Jones?
Yes.
Mrs. Bochet?
Yes.
Mr. Rockland?
Yes.
Motion passes.
I will advise the audience that we will be in executive session for the length of time necessary for the discussion. No votes will be taken while the board is in executive session. All votes will be made in public. Additionally, public disclosure is not required of matters discussed in a properly held executive session. At this time, the board meeting stands in recess to go into executive session. Motion to reconvene the board meeting and continue with the regular order of the agenda to vote on items discussed in executive session. Mr. Castillo, seconded by Mr. Rock. Next item, well, no. Next item.
The next item is on page 64, item 6.2, consideration of a records review regarding the reinstatement of a Louisiana teaching certificate appropriate to the credentials of Dr. Shonda DeQuinita Ford. The recommendation is to grant, deny, or defer.
Can I get a motion?
Second.
Second, Mr. Garvey.
Any
opposed?
Is there any interest in taking all of these together?
Globo?
Yes, I'd amend the motion to take all of them at once, Globo.
And the motion would be
Grant.
for all of them,
Yes, ma'am.
and to reinstate on 6.5.
Yes.
All right, so we have a motion to take all 6.2 through 6.5 in Globo to grant all of these. The motion on the floor was Mr. Rock, seconded by Mr. Garvey.
Any opposed? All right. Hearing none, motion passes.
This concludes your agenda.